Andy, thank you.
Hang on, I'll let you know when you're ready.
Oh, it says live here to me, but that's why I'll wait again. I'll rewind.
Right, over to you.
Andy, thank you very much indeed, and thank you everybody. We're now just under the 200 numbers, so we've again got a lot of attendees out there. I'm really pleased to see everybody again for the latest in the air tonight. It's not Groundhog Day, although we have got Kevin Caton back again. This time he's come with an army of friends and assistants to help improve all of our RC aerobatic skills, I believe. So I'm really intrigued by this. Again, as Andy said, with the questions here, we'll start putting the questions together. Kevin and the guys are all lined up for those towards the end of the last sort of 20, 25 minutes. So, yeah. Kevin, over to you.
Thank you, Mark. Again, it's great to be back. I expect many of the people on will be second-time visitors to the aerobatics presentations. If there are any people who are just joining the aerobatics webinar for the first time, there's obviously the opportunity to go back and have a look at the first one if you feel as though I'm starting partway through. So good afternoon and good morning if you're from afar. I know there's one or two people who've contacted me from many thousands of miles away who might be on, although they may pick it up on YouTube as well. So as the title suggests, we're now going to look at moving forward with aerobatics. In the December presentation, I talked about why I think it's a great idea, and many of us do, for any RC pilot to learn some aerobatics. This now is going to assume that you agree with me and you want to learn a little bit more. And it doesn't really matter whether you're flying a plane like the one at the top or you want to fly one like the one at the bottom. And you can choose which one you like the look of the most. They're both aerobatic planes and they both fly great. But what I'm going to tell you will apply to the simplest of aerobatic designs right through to the ones that we fly in competitions across the UK and across the world. So if sorry, I've just lost my clicker. There we go. So in bullet point format, we're going to cover those topics tonight, setting the plane up a little bit more than I covered back in December. I talked about the basics of control throws. I'm going to show you how to get them accurate and matched tonight. Some thoughts on reliability and just a little bit more knocking down of rumours and myths. We are going to get onto flying because most of us, certainly in the UK, have been unable to do that for many weeks or months now, and we're all itching to get out there as soon as the weather permits and more importantly the government permits. How to practice if you want to improve your aerobatic flying, and finally for those that want to go on to try a competition, the sort of things you'll expect when you start to attend an aerobatic event. Just a very, very quick recap from last time then. If you recall, if you're on the webinar in December, for precision aerobatics, control surface throws need to be a lot less than you might be used to flying with. I also recommend using a minimum number of transmitter rates and switches to avoid confusing yourself. And first and foremost, and this goes really for any branch of aviation, make sure the centre of gravity of the plane is in the correct range to give yourself the best possible chance of a successful flight performance. So firstly, we're going to go into control surface throws and how to set up accurately. So this is workshop stuff, and as ever, time spent in the workshop saves a lot of messing around at the field. It does look like a bit of work after you've spent all that time building or assembling your plane and connecting linkages up. But some jigs and tools just to help you get the plane, particularly the flying surfaces, sat rigidly on a workbench so you can measure things, absolutely pays dividends. It's important to make notes of what you do. But the key thing is, once you've done this, that's it. You really only have to do it once, and it'll make your plane fly better for all the time you fly it. So the first thing I've shown you in the picture on the right hand side, it's a jig that I made for setting up a plug-in tailplane. And I recognise not all aircraft have plug-in tails. The larger ones tend to for convenient transport. So you can see there, it's just 1.5mm ply sides with the holes drilled through where the tailplane joiners fit through, and a couple of 12mm balsa blocks holding it apart. I'll show you it in the next slide how it's set up. The reason I'm concentrating on the tailplane first is so many aircraft nowadays use twin elevator servos, and it's absolutely vital that you get your two elevators lined up with each other and with the same throw up and down, and it prevents all sorts of problems with corkscrewing loops and things like that. So let's look at that first, and I'll show you what I do with a plug-in tail. So there's the same unit. There's just a spare little 12-volt battery I've got weighting it down on my workbench. The two tailplane halves are plugged in, and as you can see just behind the battery, there's a receiver there. So both the elevator servos are plugged in, and the transmitter's set with the trim to 0, and the main throw of the elevators, the ATV, in my case on Fataba, is set to 100% with a slightly reduced rate for normal flight. So that setup is quite simple, and that holds everything in place while you do some measurements. And if you just look down at the right-hand bottom of that slide, you'll see I've already got a set square lined up and a little mark on the tailplane. So just moving on. There's the right tailplane. Servos switched on, plugged in, everything's set to neutral, so nothing's going to move. And you can see there that on 35mm on that scale is the elevator neutral. And if it's not, again, a recap from last time, don't go playing with subtrims and things on your transmitter. Switch everything off, unplug it, and adjust the clevis and get it right so that the tailplane and elevator are actually aligned and level. It took me 3 goes on that one. I went 2 turns out on the clevis and then half a turn back until I was completely satisfied it was lined up. So be patient and do that. And again, it's a one-off job. You don't have to do it again. And then we just check the throws. So we go up elevator, and that one you can see there, that's up to between 48 and 49mm. So 13.5mm of up throw. And down elevator, 20.5 on the scale, which is 14.5mm of movement. So slightly more down than up, again, from last time. And that gives you an even response to up and down elevator for when you're flying the plane inverted. So that's it, a few minutes work, write the deflections down, and then just move across to the other tailplane side and make sure they match exactly. So same neutral. And as I've said, just set your travel volumes or your rates until you get identical throws. You can also eyeball along the 2 tailplane halves. There's all sorts of adjustment throw meters and things you can buy as well. But in the absence of those, just measuring on a set square like that with some markers on it will give just as accurate a result. So that's it. Important, a few slides on that, but get the tailplane right. If you have a fixed tailplane and 1 elevator servo, lucky you, provided the elevators are glued together accurately through the hole in the rudder. They'll be lined up, they'll both move the same amount up and down, and that makes life a whole lot easier. Separate elevators and separate servos are very convenient, but it's important to get them lined up right. Ailerons next, obviously a vital flight control. This is a plug-in wing. If you have a one-piece wing, I've got something at the end of this next 3 or 4 slides that will show you a way of checking ailerons without a setup like this. But this again, it's a couple of 1.5mm jigs that came from the aircraft box that are used for setting up. And you don't have to have anything fancy than a couple of heavy books there. I've just got laying on them to hold the wing tube in place. The front wing locating pin, you can't see, it's out of sight, but it's, I point to it, it's just on the, just behind the leading edge, out of sight behind that orange book. And that holds the wing in place from an incidence or angle attack point of view. But it means that the trailing edge of the wing and the aileron aren't going to move while you do your measurements. So not particularly high tech, but effective. And it's the same principle here. A little pen mark on the wing and on the centre of the aileron at the root. We line that up with a set square, and we can see 45mm here. And then we check the up throw, 59, so that's 14mm up, and 31.5, which gives us 13.5mm down. So this one's got slight aileron differential, this design, slightly more up than down, which helps with making the rolls axial, so it rolls around the axis of the fuselage. That's my aircraft. I would recommend starting with no differential at all. And again, set these up using your servo or your channel ATVs, and set each wing up separately, write down your results, and make sure they're both going up and down the same amount and they're returning to neutral. So that's aileron and elevator done. The alternative, if you've got a one-piece wing or it's not easy to jig your wing up, again, a simple jig you can make. This is 0.8mm ply with a couple of pieces of 3mm balsa, just sino to it, and that's a snug fit over the wing root. The 0.8mm ply slides between the gap between the wing and the aileron, and this one's got quite a large throw deflection on it. In this case, it's the high rate throw that I use for snap rolls, and you can see there the deflection up and deflection down. That's about 30 degrees. So that's a fast rolls. Of course, it's perfectly feasible to put two other marks on with about 1/3 of the movement for ordinary flight. So that's what I showed on the previous slides. So there's plenty of ways of doing this. The key point is get your wing or wing panels mounted so they're not going to move, and measure the throws and make sure they're equal up and down and equal across the two wings, or 4 ailerons if you have a biplane. Rudder's not as critical actually, so I haven't even drawn any markers on here. That's rudder deflection to the left on my aircraft there. The reason it's less critical is you haven't got two servos on your rudder unless you're flying a very big sort of IMAC type plane. There's only one rudder, there's only one servo, so there's nothing to actually match up. All you're looking for here is the same amount of left rudder as right rudder. And in fact, if that needs fine tuning, you can do that in flight when you're doing flying trimming. It's perfectly feasible just to put a piece of marker tape on the floor, or lay a ruler on there and eyeball down it and set yourself to rudder throw. But that's about the deflection you should be looking at. So that's it on the flying controls. That's a step on from last time. So the key things from both presentations: not too much throw, but make sure everything's equal and all your surfaces are lined up. Take the time to do it, and then it's done for the life of the plane. Okay, next up. I wanted to put 2 or 3 slides in about radio installation, and I hear and read a lot of things about needing 2 batteries and 2 switches because airplanes are expensive and it's a big investment and such like. There's a photograph of the 2017 World Champions aeroplane. It's a biplane like the one at the front, and you'll note there is 1 receiver, 1 battery, 1 switch, just 2 leads coming out of the receiver. There's one that goes to the connector box for the S-bus system, which many will be familiar with, and one back to the speed controller running down towards the bottom of the picture. So there isn't a lot of redundancy, but the key point is that the stresses on this type of aeroplane nowadays with electric drive is far, far less than it was in the days of engines. Radio equipment is incredibly reliable. The weakest link, as always, is the pilot. You are the least reliable part of the whole chain between the aeroplane and a successful flight. So that works for the world champion, who, unless he's specially dialed in tonight, or the former world champion, I should say, to be fair, he's probably a better flyer than anybody that's on this webinar by quite a long way. It works for him, so it ought to be good enough for you. And on that note, there's my plane, which happens to be the same plane. And it's got one switch, one battery, one receiver, and the same single S-bus connectors, and leads out for the top aileron servos, bottom aileron servos, and the one disappearing off the top of the screen down to the tail, which drives via a single lead, 2 elevator servos and 1 rudder servo. All very, very reliable, and it's all you need. If you want to put 2 batteries in, fine. I'm not going to say don't, but you're adding weight, and I'm not convinced you're getting much more reliability. And finally, the front end, a modern 2-meter aerobatic plane. Most people will be aware they're quite big beasts, and there's quite a bit of space in the front. That's the motor is the back end of a contra-rotating propeller drive. Single drive systems are perfectly good for aerobatics. There's many great pilots use those. The speed controller is just sat down on the bottom, strapped in. The key thing with the speed controller, particularly on this size of aircraft, is make sure it's got a good flow of air over it. What you can't see hidden underneath the motor is a large air duct at the front, and there's one at the back of the fuselage. These controllers pull 80 amps or more, and if they haven't got air flowing over them, they will get hot, and they will get so hot that they'll shut themselves down. So just make sure it's all neat and tidy, but it only needs to be a minimalist setup. You don't need fancy ducting or anything like that. So that's the reliability and safety part covered. So let's go flying. Aerobatic flying, of course, is flying a sequence of manoeuvres, one after the other, watched by judges. A typical flying sequence lasts 6 or 7 minutes for the airborne manoeuvres. When you're learning aerobatics, you really do need to break things down into small steps. And this is where the discipline comes in. As I've said there, have you got the mindset to go flying and spend a whole day flying loops, or just inside loops? Now, if you want to fly loops without thinking too hard about them, you'll get bored after 3 or 4, I can guarantee it. But if you want to fly a loop in front of yourself at the right depth and at the right height, and no matter which way the wind is, whether it's coming from the left or from the right, or as more often the case, blowing in, blowing out, or a combination of those, that's actually much harder than it looks. And if you have the mindset to persevere with aerobatics, you'll find a flying session of loops actually quite challenging. And when you can fly 10 loops one after the other that are in the right place and don't blow in or out or corkscrew or look egg-shaped or something like that, you will realize it's worth the effort. And this applies to all sorts of precision disciplines and sports, things like that. You know, the great professional footballers can do keep you uppy for hours on end, can't they, and things like that. Tennis players can do serve after serve after serve after serve. And if you want to get good, you've got to be prepared to do that. The nice thing is it can be interesting, and it will give you confidence in your flying when you move on to things. And the same thing, I've just talked about loops. The same thing applies to rolls, stall turns, and spins. The basic elements. You keep practicing those in their different combinations, you can get those right. then all the harder manoeuvres that come later on, as you get better at flying, will be so much easier. So we'll cover that, what to do in a little bit more detail next. So for the benefit of the majority, I guess, who live in the UK, wind is a fact of life. Without it, we'd probably have power cuts every other day nowadays. You do get calm days, but guess what? When you take off your plane and you go 200-300 feet in the air, you'll find there's a wind. There's nearly always a wind. It's lovely flying in calm conditions, but when you do, of course, everything that isn't right is down to you. When it's windy, you could say, "Oh, it's the wind." But what I'm going to cover is how to compensate for that, and enjoy the challenge. Some aerobatic basics then. Unlike full-size aerobatics, model aerobatics have to be flown so that the geometry is correct from an observer on the ground, either you, the pilot, or the judges who would be sat behind you. So you have to allow for the wind, and your plane's a lot smaller than a full-size aircraft as well, so it can be quite a challenge. What the judges are looking for with the shapes of aerobatic manoeuvres is the trajectory of the centre of gravity of the aircraft. You don't know exactly where the centre of gravity is, but you look at the area between the wing and the fuselage and watch where that's going. And as I've said in the past, where the aircraft is going is not necessarily the way the nose is pointing. And particularly in a wind, it's up to you as the pilot to make sure that the aircraft moves in the right direction, even if it's not necessarily pointing in the right direction. So we use terms like heading and flight path. So as a recap, the heading of an aircraft, that's the direction that the nose of the plane is pointing, and it's the way that the controls will cause the aircraft to respond. But the flight path is the movement of the plane in relation to the ground, a ground observer. So where do we fly? Well, in global terms, there's Buckminster, a nice airborne shot of Buckminster. How we miss it at the moment. It's a bit of a busy picture. Russ, who's on the panel with me, will probably recognise that. I think he generated or took that one. But what you're seeing is the aerobatic box laid out at Buckminster from above. The white triangle, effectively superimposed on the terrain, is the box from side to side. So the pilot stands at the apex of the triangle, and the box is marked out 60 degrees to the left, 60 degrees to the right, and what you can't see on here is it's also 60 degrees upwards into the sky. So it's like a pyramid that's tipped onto its side with a pilot stood at the apex. And if you're being judged, the judges sit between 7 and 10 meters behind you, which is usually far enough for them to be able to speak without you hearing, which can be interesting. But it gives both the pilot and the judges a good unimpeded view of the manoeuvring zone. And that's out there on the 150-meter line that you see going from left to right across the middle of that picture. The smaller aircraft will fly a little bit closer. But it reinforces the point, actually, that precision aerobatics is flown quite a long way out from where pilots stand, and often much further than they fly in a club setting. So that's something, if you progress to competitions, just to be aware of. So I'm going to talk a little bit about crosswind flying now, because up or downwind, I touched on it last time. If the wind was blowing along the line, as you see there, your aircraft goes fast downwind and not so fast upwind, but generally doesn't get deviated from the track that you're trying to fly in front of yourself. And when you're out flying, try to pick a track and a center marker that you can fly in consistently. The fortunate few will be able to fly in a field where you can turn around sometimes, maybe turn around 90 degrees if the wind's blowing across the strip for your takeoffs and landings, and some clubs will pick a particular flight line that day. However, a lot of us don't have that luxury, and most certainly if you go to an aerobatic competition, that box will be marked out with flags and poles, and they're not going to move it if the wind changes. Sorry, folks, that's just how it is. So I'm looking at a worst case scenario here with the wind blowing either straight at you or sometimes straight from behind. They're both quite challenging. And most people will be aware then to fly a straight track up and down in those conditions, that you have to angle the aircraft, looking from above there, the aircraft fuselage, so that it's pointing away from the line as it's flying up and down. And then the flight path will be exactly along the line, and the angle depends on the speed of the aeroplane and the strength of the wind. The aircraft, of course, is trimmed neutrally and flying in its own body of air. It has no reference to the ground, but you're stood on the ground watching it. So you as a pilot will angle it correctly. So just flying up and down, doing that and turning around at each end is a challenge in itself, and it's something we teach pilots at the aerobatic training days to do. It's a good drill to learn, just so you don't get blown in and end up with a stiff neck and not impressing the judges and spectators. Always worth getting somebody to watch as well, because you're focused on the aircraft, and you sometimes lose depth perception, and suddenly you find that you turn around and the aircraft's just about overhead. So get your friendly helper or caller to watch the track for you when you're doing that. Now let's try a loop. So a loop is a circle in a vertical plane. We're looking down at the top of the aircraft here. The aircraft's flying from right to left and the wind is blowing in. So we've angled the fuselage out. So as we apply up elevator, the aircraft will start to pitch, but it will not pitch in the direction it's flying. It will pitch in the plane, if you like, the fuselage is pointing. So although the aircraft's blowing in, the next slide shows what happens as you do the first 90 degrees of a loop and get to the vertical. So there we are, it's not quite at the vertical, so we're looking end on downwards at the fuselage, and it's coming up out of the screen towards us. The wind has blown it along the correct track, but because the fuselage is pointing out to start with, the wings are now no longer perpendicular to the flight line by the same angle that the fuselage started at. So we've got to do something about that, otherwise, as you keep going around the loop, you will most certainly end up with a corkscrew shape, and it will end up being back over your head if you're not careful. So you do need, for a simple loop in a wind, to apply aileron, in this case right aileron, to line the wings back up at this point and then track it correctly over the top of the loop, and then the third quarter, and finally to the pullout. So you're rolling back into the wind, is probably the best way to describe it, in order to keep the aircraft in the correct part of the sky. So if you think a loop is just a case of applying elevator and closing your eyes and counting to 5, it's quite a bit harder than that. So you've got to manage the speed, the pitch, and in this case the roll, and probably also the yaw, because the speed will change, and the yaw angle that's needed to compensate the wind will change. So just a loop takes an awful lot of practice in the crosswind. That's the bad news out of the way, actually, because the loops are the hard ones. So if you move to rolls, it's actually much easier. So that's a top view of a roll going from right to left across the screen. I've rather clumsily called this the crab angle. What I mean is the angle that the fuselage is pointing out to the flight line. The plane isn't crabbing; it's flying through air that's moving towards the pilot in this case. But if you keep a constant speed and you have the angle of the fuselage set correctly, as you roll the aircraft using aileron, perhaps a little bit of rudder to hold the fuselage up in the knife edge segments, it will simply hold that track and it will roll axially, and it will terminate the roll in exactly the same place. So it's just as though you're flying in no wind, provided you get the angle right in the first place. So that's the good news. Loops are hard, rolls not so hard. The other two basic aerobatic manoeuvres, stall turns and spins, they're equally affected by the wind. As I covered last time, speed management is important in a stall turn. The wind correction here is to keep the fuselage pointing, sorry, the aircraft pointing or tracking straight up and straight down either side of the stall. One thing that's important in a crosswind for precision aerobatics is it really is best to stall into the wind. The exception, of course, is the B certificate. If that's in towards the flight line, that's not recommended on B certificate. It's not allowed. So I'll not cover that in any detail. It's just a case of practicing that and holding the track of the aircraft correctly. So as I say, try to stall into any crosswind. Spins, again, it's the wind correction on spin is about holding the track of the aircraft before and after the spin. You do get a little break in the spin because the aircraft is in a stalled condition. It will drift with the wind, whichever direction the wind is blowing, and you as a pilot can't really do anything about that. The good news is the judges can't either. They're not allowed to downgrade a spin that blows downwind. So provided you set it up right, you do your spin and then you correct the exit to get back on the correct flight path. So that's the four elements it's covered. A little bit of detail about the loop, because that is quite a complicated one, and it's the one that takes the most time to learn. So that's the flying part of it. So I'm just going to briefly, for the rest of the presentation, talk about what you might wish to do next, because I've probably put enough ideas in your head to prepare you for when we can get out to fly again. If you're within striking distance of BMFA Buckminster, it's a great place. There's sessions known as Introduction to Aerobatics, which are run on the first Wednesday of every month. Sorry for those that work in the week. It is a weekday, and Buckminster is a busy place, but it is worth booking a day off if you normally have to work in the week. The tuition's free. You simply pay the Buckminster site fee, and when we're able to use the site, we usually put a buffet lunch on as well, so there's a small charge to cover that. And there's a group of pilots who will be there and will give you one-to-one instruction and coaching while you're learning aerobatics. You don't have to be a hotshot aerobatic pilot. As long as you're competent, you can turn up and we'll teach you how to get the best out of your plane. So obviously these are suspended at the moment with the current restrictions, but as soon as we can get that flying again, they'll resume. So look out on the BMFA website and or Facebook pages for that. Obviously, I'm going to give a plug for our own organisation, the Great Britain RC Aerobatic Association. We've been going for over 40 years now. It was one of the first specialist bodies in the BMFA. And as such, we are the competition organisers. We do competitions and training right across the UK, as well as running the RC Aerobatics Nationals on our own championships event. We also, naturally, since we rely on judges, we do train judges as well as pilots if that's something that interests you. We charge £25 a year. Admittedly, we're not the cheapest specialist body, but some of the equipment that we have for judging and scoring competitions is quite sort of high tech, and there's a fair bit of capital outlay for that. So hand on heart, yeah, we do have to charge you a little bit to cover the cost of that. Our own website has recently been refurbished, and in particular for new pilots, we've got a new to aerobatics section on that. So do go along and have a look. GBRCAA.org, as it says on the picture to the right. So if you fancy a go at a competition, what can you expect? Well, I can't promise you weather like that. That was a nationals either 2019 or 2018. I can't remember which. That glorious nationals that we had, where the sun shone and it was warm for 3 days. We normally fly at club fields right up and down the country. The season runs from April until the beginning of October to try and capture the best of the weather. There's 4 aerobatic classes for different levels of ability: clubman, intermediate, masters, and finally the FAI class. And we hold a league through the season in each class. So if you're in a particular class, don't think you're a second-class citizen. You'll be flying against people of similar ability to you, and you've got the chance to compete with them for league points and win a trophy at the end of the season. Competition days, normally about 8 hours. You fly one at a time. You get 3 flights, and you need to make them count because they're important flights. But you get to watch the other guys fly, obviously. So there's plenty to see and do, and it's a surprisingly busy day. Even if as a pilot you're only getting 3 flights. You count your best 2 to get the final result, but I would say don't rely on dropping your first flight. Quite often the first flight can be the score that wins a competition. So don't think it's an easy job just to not bother on your first flight and use it as a practice. We are holding a special event when we get flying again later in the year, called Clubman Plus, and that will be aimed specifically at new competitors, and we'll probably put an element of training into that day as well as a competition. That's a typical field. That's Hurley in Warwickshire, quite close to Coleshill. A great site, that. So you see the quality of it. We hold competitions there regularly, and that was us last season in the early days of resuming flying with social distancing. Just some hints and tips for what to do at competition, so long as you're not the first person to fly that day. If you are, sorry about that, but somebody has to be. But do watch the other pilots, watch and learn. You'll learn an awful lot by sitting a suitable distance behind the judges and watching. There's always help available. If you've not brought a helper with you, just ask, and a more experienced pilot will come along and help you. Be ready to fly. The time goes quite quickly, so make sure all your equipment's bolted together and tested, and you're ready to go about 10 minutes before your flight's due. So 1 or 2 competitors before you. Some natural behaviours and reactions. It's perfectly all right to get nervous or tense before a flight. The very best in the world, they might not look like they're nervous, but they'll be tense. If you want to fly your best, you'll be concentrating very hard. So it's a perfectly normal reaction. And if it all does feel a bit too much, surprisingly, shaky hands and thumbs don't translate across to the aeroplane. After all I've said about setting your linkages up carefully and things like that, if you tremble a little bit on the sticks, you will not see it on the plane, trust me. It makes very little difference. So don't be embarrassed if you are a bit nervous on your first few goes. Some key things, these apply to all competitive disciplines, not just model aircraft flying. You can only control your own flight. You can't control other pilots' flights, or if you do, you'll be in trouble. Don't get fixated with what other people score. You go out there, do your best performance, take the feedback, get feedback from your caller. Judges are always willing to give you feedback, perhaps not straight after your flight because they'll have another flyer to watch, but generally happy to come and talk to you at the end of a round to give you some advice on how to improve. As I say, they're quite long days, but if you haven't travelled hours and hours and hours, it's always good etiquette to stay to the end of the day and recognise the winners, because if you stick at it long enough, one day that'll be you on the podium. So you don't want to get your prize and have nobody there. And finally, for all I've said about competitions, we do this because we enjoy it. It's not life or death. It can be serious at national and international level, but at the end of the day, we're all model flyers. We enjoy what we do, and this is our particular branch of it. We love it. We love talking about it. But if you want to join us, come along and have some fun. And that is it, folks. Again, I've talked a little bit longer than I probably expected to. But we've reached the last slide, and it's time for some questions and answers.
Kevin, many thanks for that. It was very enjoyable. Thoroughly enjoyed that. We've got a fair number of questions lined up, so I'm gonna kick off pretty quickly. In doing so, if you can unshare your screen in a few moments, that will get everybody so we can see who's talking back to us. And if those other panelists want to open up their mics a little bit, they unmute. They can come into it. Right, let's start the ball rolling. Ian Underwood, what aircraft would you guys recommend for a beginner with a low budget, no experience flying aerobatic aircraft, but a decent amount in non-aerobatic and very little building experience?
Can I ask Russ to take that one? Because he's coming to F3A fairly recently, and obviously, as most people know, wrote an article in the BMFA news about it.
Yeah, I would answer that in two ways, actually. First way is, if you're not that experienced in aerobatics, use a simulator. Simulators are incredibly useful to work out how to fly loops, rolls, whatever, and it can save you crashing an aircraft. So you don't have to get the latest and greatest simulator. One a few years old, secondhand, would be a good way to do it. After that, as far as a model is concerned, I just drive a sports car, so my model has to fit in a sports car. So I don't fly any of these 2-meter models. I fly a much smaller one. I started off with Introduction to Aerobatics days with a little extra 330, which Kevin helped me immensely to improve my techniques. I then actually decided that I needed to buy a F3A type model because my extra was a little bit underpowered. And I bought one secondhand through the GBRCAA. So it's probably worth your fee to be able to get onto the forums. There's a secondhand for sale and wanted. And if you put that you want something on, you'd probably find that there's a lot of people who are going to offer you some very nice models. I bought a Miss Wind biplane, 300 quid, secondhand, and that's the one that I won the first competition with. So you don't have to spend bucket loads of money, but just take it in steady stages.
Brilliant, thanks, Russ. Alan Jackson, I have mechanically limited the control surfaces moving using the innermost servo horn hole and outermost hole on the control surface horn. This still gives too much movement. Is it better to use dual rates to limit the movement or ATV?
I can take that one. In theory, it doesn't actually matter whether you use ATV or dual rates, provided you set the throws about the recommended 10 to 12 degrees on elevator and aileron. With practice, you probably need higher throws for more advanced manoeuvres. So on balance, I think the best thing is to leave the ATVs high and set the rates down a little bit, and that gives you a little bit of headroom to increase the throws at a later stage.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Paul Curnow. Hi team, I'm just about to put together a Mythos 125E. Any areas that require special attention or just as information provided in kit?
I've had one of those.
Any of my co-panelists? There you go, Mike.
Yeah, I'll take that one. I've had the Mythos. Very nice plane, flew with it. It is delicate on the undercarriage when you are learning to fly. So beef that up a little bit. I think that's probably the best bit of advice. The other advice I will say is buy the most expensive servos you can. They're probably the most important part of the whole plane. They'll serve you a lot of lifetimes of different airframes. Get a decent set of servos in there, set them up as Kevin has suggested, and we'll probably go into a bit more detail later. But no, the Mythos will do you very well. Set it up as it says.
Thank you. Very good. Paul Swinsko asks, how do you trim the rudder? Some people say just put it in line with the fuselage, but surely there is a way when you're flying to get it perfect.
I'll take that one. Set it up in line with the fuselage to start with. Beyond the scope of tonight, because it would need a little bit more time. This is probably one to do at the field. The rudder alignment and the motor side thrust are two variables that need to be tuned to get the aircraft to fly straight vertically. But if the rudder's a long way out, you'll actually be able to stand behind the aircraft and watch it yaw in flight as you fly it away from you. But the best starting point is just line it up with the fuselage.
Fantastic. Charlie Holford asks, do you require a B certificate to compete in competitions as a clubman?
No, you don't. We ask for an A certificate, but we have put our competitors on notice, if you like, and in a year from now, we will require a B certificate. So 2021, when we get flying again, is the year to get your B, because it is a nationally recognised achievement that shows you're competent to fly in a public environment, which flying in front of judges and fellow competitors is.
Thank you.
Can I just add to that?
Is that Peter? We can hear you, Peter, but we can't see you.
The B certificate
Your
maneuver.
frozen.
Sorry, you can't see me?
Yeah, we've got you, Peter.
We got you.
Got me? Right. The B certificate maneuvers are very similar to the clubman schedule in most respects. And actually train yourself up to the B, or you train yourself to fly the clubman, you're aiming for pretty much the same point. The clubman's got a couple of different maneuvers from the B certificate. Big difference between the clubman and the B is the clubman is flown as a schedule, which means you don't have time to reposition the airplane if you've got it in the wrong place. If you come out of one maneuver wrong, you're into the wrong. It's a bit like playing snooker. Think of the cue ball. If the cue ball ends up in the wrong place, the next shot is difficult to take. So it's all about making sure that as the airplane exits, it's in the right place, at the right height, and the right distance out, and then the next maneuver will flow. But learning to fly the B is very, very good practice for the clubman anyway. The two are very similar in terms of the sorts of things you want to do. So it's not, and once you get into it, it isn't too difficult to do. And it makes a huge difference to how you fly the clubman, so on. So it's well worth doing. Don't put it off because, you know, nobody wants to do the B. It's difficult to find examiners to deal with it. You can go up to Buckminster and do your B test there if you're having difficulty finding people to show you how to do it. But if you ask any aerobatic pilot, can you demonstrate the B to me? They'll be able to do it as a drop of a hat because it's a relatively simple set.
Peter, we're going to move on a little bit because we're losing a little bit of your
pilot who you talk to do it.
Peter, I think we've got that. We're losing your broadband signal, so we're going to move on to the next question. Vince Beasley, do you change the C of G for wind conditions, guys?
I don't. Anybody else?
No, I don't. What I have done, we had an interesting competition up at Buckminster actually, which was exceptionally windy for me anyway. And one thing I did change was my throttle curve, so I had more power, but not the C of G.
Yeah, if your aircraft trimmed correctly, the plane doesn't know it's flying in a wind, so the C of G will be correct whether it's calm or windy.
Brilliant. Thank you, guys. Andrew Ellison asks, precision aerobatic models seem to change appearance and specification according to the demands of the schedule. We have overly large, deep, fat fuselages, now contra props, trailing edge, drag features, canalizers, which have occasionally morphed into whole second or third wing. What do you think the next big area of development or trend in maneuvers will be that you'll see another change in the models?
I could take that one. Over the last 5 or 6 years, the planes have certainly got, well, let me use a quite basic word, they've got fatter. They've got more bulbous fuselages and extra appendages, either extra little wings on the top or the bottom, or biplanes or triplane. A lot of it is the need to be different. The manoeuvres have changed at the very top level. The world's top pilots are so good that a lot of the manoeuvres now are flown in knife edge with the aircraft on its side. So you've got knife edge loops, you've got lots of rolling circles and things. So a large, deep fuselage meets the requirement for an aircraft that will manoeuvre up, down, left, right, and sideways as well. The large fuselages add drag, which helps on the constant speed on a vertical down section. Contra-rotating propellers reduce propeller slipstreaming effects. So they're all technical solutions to a challenge that's brought in by a schedule. I don't know what the next iteration of schedules will be, so it's hard to predict how the aircraft are going to develop in the years to come. And having said all that, pick a plane that you like the look of and fly it a lot, and you will beat 99% of pilots at a competition. If you're going to go for the World Championship and you want to win it, having your own design that looks a bit different to everybody else's might get you noticed. For the rest of us, pick something you like and fly that.
Got two questions from Adrian Bassett, pretty much on the same tone. Been flying for 60 years. Can you explain how S-Bus works or how to do it? And don't understand how you can get all the servos on one lead.
Right. As quickly as I can, because it could take a long time, this one. The standard setup is that your receiver would give the correct pulse width from channel 1 from socket number 1 and channel 2 from socket number 2 and so on. A serial bus system sends a signal out of any or all of the sockets, and the message is basically channel 1 move to this position, channel 2 move to that, and each servo is programmed to respond to only its own signal, which is why you can fire it all down one wire. I think that's as simple and quick as an explanation as I can give.
But got nobody answering.
It works phenomenally well when you're plugging your tail in, and you've got three, a triple socket and 2 elevator servos and a rudder. You don't have to think about which one you plug it in. You just plug into any available socket and it will work.
Fantastic, thank you.
It's magic.
Graham Flory, as a beginner and with no one at your club to learn from, where do you start in terms of which manoeuvres to learn and practice? Is there recommended YouTube series to watch?
I can't think of a YouTube series. There may be one. I don't know if anybody else can. But
there isn't a, Kevin, if I just come in there.
Yeah, go on, Russ.
Obviously, there isn't a series, but if somebody wants to look, there is a Clubman video, which is on the GBRCAA website. It's under schedules, which gives a good indication. So that would be a good thing to watch and start learning, and then just do the couple of rolls, couple of loops, and go along to one of the training days.
Yeah.
If I could just pop in without my video, it's Peter Jenkins. There are a number of videos on the website of sort of the FAI model schedules being flown, and those are way beyond where you would want to start. But you may want to just look at those just to see the art of the possible and how big the maneuvers are, how under control they seem all the time, just to give you something to aim at, as opposed to saying, I know absolutely nothing about this game, where do I start? So that's worth having a look at. So F3A into YouTube will usually produce a fair number of them.
Thank you, Peter. Steliana Sani, thank you for the very well put together webinar. Very useful information all around. Is there a size limitation on the Clubman competition?
I think the short answer is no. If it's legal to fly in the UK, you can come along to a Clubman competition and fly it.
Thank you. Alan Williams, many people talk of the aircraft corkscrewing into the wind whilst flying, particularly as the stall is approached. I subscribe to the parcel of air theory, in which the aircraft is oblivious to the wind rather. It just flies in it. What does the team think? Sorry for that, stumbling on that one.
Yeah, it's all right. It's the I believe it's the weathercocking debate. Okay, so here's my steer on it. Others may not agree. Aircraft weathercock on the ground. They do not weathercock in the air. Anybody else?
I would just add to that the moment you start to come away from straight and level flying where the aircraft is trimmed hands off, if you apply rudder, the aircraft will yaw. And that is part of its yaw control. If you release the rudder pressure, the aircraft yaw stability will return it to flying balanced. But all the time you have a control deflected, it will cause the aircraft to do something different. And quite often people apply rudder unbeknown to themselves, or apply one of the other controls, and they're not aware they're doing it. Typically, if you're pulling up into a loop and you tend to apply aileron as you pull back, and you get an interference between the controls. Slightly different from weathercocking, but it's very difficult to get used to the fact that you're using all the controls all the time, and you don't often realize that you've got a control stuck in which you didn't mean to have.
I think that's a really good point to pick up on with the controls, because I really had a struggle with that. And until one of the guys, I think it was Peter actually, told me to up the spring pressures on all of my TX joysticks, I was always holding a bit of additional control in, which I didn't think I was. So one of the things you will do if you're flying aerobatics is have a really hard, heavy stick position on your TX, which does help you putting just the one or two control inputs in rather than something you're not expecting.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's worth adding that there's so much going on in the air in relation to the size of the model aircraft, even a large 2-meter one, that even if you do believe in weathercocking, you shouldn't worry about it, because you'll be pushing the rudder, elevator and ailerons and manipulating the throttle all the time. Most of it's turbulent.
John Collister asks, how do you sync the elevators when they're twin servo but fixed to the plane?
Well, the thing I probably didn't mention is you need to run the two elevator servos on two channels, not on a wire lead. So if you don't have an S-bus system, you need two wires running down the back onto each servo, and then you can adjust each channel independently. I know, John, if that doesn't answer his question, he can contact me directly. I can help him with that. Yeah,
I've just told it I'm digital meter. So I use a digital meter with the standard Robart gauge, which has got the little ball removed, but a digital meter from Amazon or something will be the weight of gold. And the other thing I think from Kevin's presentation, something I've learned with setting up models, which it's one of the big things we do, is don't just set it up in one way. I do it the way Kevin says, and then set it up with maybe a digital meter, use different rulers, make sure everything's flat, etc. But don't just rely on one way of setting up your plane. Do it multiple ways, and you'll get a better condition.
Mike, thank you for that.
If I could just add to that, Peter Jenkins, that there on some transmitters there is a servo matching function. I have a JR that has a servo matching function, and you can use that for two servos operating two ailerons on the same wing, or in my case, two servos operating the two elevators. And all I did was to strap two nicely sharpened pencils to the elevators so that they just met clear of the rudder. And then as you pull the stick back, you can see that there is a slight difference between the position of the pencils, and you can use the system on the transmitter to adjust the in-between positions, if you like, of the servos so they match up all the way through from fully up to fully down and everywhere in between. So that's another function, but you need to buy a high-end radio to get that function.
Thank you, Peter. Mike, I just wanted to say, some of us, if you can see that, I don't know whether you can see that, I've got my angle meter here, my digital one as well for my models.
Yeah.
They sort of they're about 10 a penny now, and they're fantastic bits of kit. John Kirkham, what's with contra-rotating props? What are the advantages compared with a normal two-blade prop?
I've started using one this last flying season, so I'll take that one. The airflow coming off the back of a contra unit spirals much less, if at all, in comparison with a single propeller, and that reduces the effect of pushing on the rudder, which causes most single propeller aircraft to require some right thrust. So it makes life that little bit easier trimming, but they also give exceptionally good propeller braking when the aircraft is flying vertically downwards. So much that I have to actually put about 1/3 power on to fly a vertical downline, otherwise the plane goes too slowly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mark Ayres.
Yeah, just add to that, having taken a contra more by accident than design, I would say that between a well set up single prop aircraft and a contra, there are relatively few pure advantages off the contra, but the airframe design can make a huge difference, which makes you think the contra is actually making a big difference. But the airframe design itself is quite important. But a well set up single prop versus a contra, I think if they're flown by equal capabilities, it will be just as good. Contras, it's like, that's the point Andy Ellison made earlier on, are an idea to get rid of the asymmetry of a single prop. There's one thing it certainly does do: the aircraft will roll left and right at exactly the same speed with the same deflections, which it won't do with a single prop, because you have to then, if you time it, you'll find that you're rolling faster with torque than against it. It also will snap left and right exactly the same speed. So those are the sort of advantages there. Disadvantages, if you nose over, it's bloody expensive replacing two props.
Mark Ayres, on a similar contra-rotation question, he appreciates the benefits of a contra prop. However, is it not an unfair advantage to those with a single prop? I don't know who wants to take that one.
I'll take that.
The point I was going to make, actually, I'll just jump in, Kevin. But the point I was going to make, until you get right to the top end, these nuances will not make a difference to your flying. You know, I've been flying 3 years now, and there's stuff out there that, you know, my fingers will not do the justice a contra prop would do to my plane. So I think until you get right to that top end, you've really got to, unless you want it for a bit of bling, lovely, but it actually adds another level of computation that you probably don't want at this stage.
Brilliant, thank you. A question that I was actually going to ask as well, if we had time, but from Phil Davis, I noticed your flying surfaces aren't tapered towards the trailing edge. Does this have any benefits? Also, do biplanes have any benefits over monoplanes?
I think I'm right in the question is that they don't taper to a knife edge at the trailing edge.
Yeah.
So there's a finite thickness trailing edge. To be honest, for ailerons and elevators, it's just for rigidity of the surface and the ability to line it up. I don't think if you had another 2 or 3 mil extra cord on it and went off to a knife edge, it'd probably be harder to keep the thing straight when you built it or covered it. The rudder, the blunt rudder trailing edge is supposed to give better rudder authority at low speeds. But as with quite a few of the answers we've given, everybody uses it. But if somebody came along with a razor sharp rudder trailing edge, probably everybody would start using that as well and say it was fantastic, much better. So I don't think it makes a lot of difference.
Brilliant, thank you. We'll just rattle through a few more because we're just running over a little bit, but that's fine. Bob Condry, I've got, amongst others, all electric, an Acro Watt standard balsa, an E-Flight Extra 300S, and a Vanquish. Love them for all different reasons, but which one would you recommend I spend my time practicing with? That's a really good question.
Right. I'm going to ask Graham because he's not had a chance to answer one yet, and you're reasonably new into the game. What would you start with?
The Vanquish.
Just like that, that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, whilst the other two are still very good aircraft, probably there's some very, slight benefits because the Vanquish is more like a traditional F3A aircraft.
Brilliant, thank you. Andrew Ellison, what is the limit to which you would take transmitter mixing for electronic corrections of airframe inaccuracies before you stop and make the model right?
You can go an awful long way with a transmitter and mixes to straighten out a crooked aeroplane. Hand on heart, I've got a slight warp issue with my #1 aircraft at the moment, and I can no longer tolerate trying to mix it out. So I'm doing some work on the wing to straighten a small aileron warp. It's better to have it aerodynamically correct and not have to mix it, because often a mix will work at one speed, and then if you change speed, it'll go out of trim again.
Thank you. We've got 3 questions here, all on mixes. Obviously, topic of the day, I think. Al Davidson, what exponential amounts are recommended as a starting point, please? Not used before. I've got another one. What about Expo? And do you use mixes? From Richard Few, and the other one was John Herman. So
Right.
Similar.
Yeah, you'll get a range of opinions on this. I'll kick off. About 20% Expo on elevator and aileron, about 40 on rudder is a good starting point, just to soften around the neutrals. The less response you've got, the less Expo you need. And yeah, when you've got to the limit of aerodynamic trimming, a little bit of mixing for things like knife edge flight can be quite useful. That's the sort of thing we'd have to cover in a Buckminster type ground school session. It's a little bit beyond the scope of what we've got time for tonight. But I'll let the others come in on their thoughts on Expo, because it is quite a personal thing. Yeah,
if I can come in there, Kevin. Just for an example, I flew all of last year with no Expo at all on rudder, on aileron and elevator. It didn't work for me. I had some Expo on the rudder, but aileron and elevator just didn't work. I tried it, and it didn't gel. So it's not something that you have to have. Fly whatever you're comfortable with, and then you can look at, once you got quite good at the maneuvers, maybe add in some Expo in afterwards. I'm now trying to, with a bit of simulator use and a bit of off-winter practice, add in some Expo in, and I think it will help. But it doesn't mean you have to do it just because Kevin does, or Tom does, or somebody else does. Just fly with what you're comfortable with.
If I can just pop in there, Peter Jenkins again. The whole point about Expo is that with the servo at its central position, the slightest movement gives you the maximum amount of movement from that mechanical linkage. And what Expo is doing is just reducing that, so that it kind of makes it more linear across the whole range of movement of the control surface. So that's the function of Expo. If you're not using any Expo, then by definition you're going the other way, because you're getting more movement right at the very round the neutral point, and less activity from the extremes. And it depends on how you feel, how comfortable you feel. But suffice to say, a little bit more give, shall we say, around neutral is ever so useful for making minor changes without them appearing.
Brilliant, thank you. Look, we're going to make this the last question. We're just starting to lose a few people, so it's a big one, probably for your trilogy. We'll probably have to get you back again, because there's a couple of comments coming back about trimming sessions. So it seems to be the topic of the moment. But Angus Balfour, how can a fuselage be made to lift more efficiently, e.g. in knife edge rolling circles, without resorting to canalizers, SFGs, etc.? Is anyone aware of the research conducted with turbulators to keep the airflow attached to the fuselage? I'm not personally, but it would be an interesting piece of research. by the way, real F3A pilots fly single prop, preferably YS. You might want to ignore that one.
Good evening, Angus. It's great to have you with us. Angus is a fabulous F3A pilot. He's probably more in tune with the an IMAC pilot, I should say as well. He's probably more in tune with the use of turbulators and large fuselages than most of us are. The answer I would give is the deeper fuselage just makes the knife edging easier. All the extra bolt-on wings, canalizers, and things like that. They can help, but I would just go back to pick a design you like and fly it. Angus would have been.
Could I just come in on that one, if I may? Angus, I think you touch on a very awkward point, because we tend to operate our aircraft at very close to what's called the transition between the laminar and turbulent boundary layer areas, and where something will work with the turbulent boundary layers operating, which will keep the flow attached, which is the purpose of side force generators and also the canalizer, because the canalizer sits at the widest point of the fuselage, which is where flow starts to break away. And what that does is to re-energize the airflow. So all of these are tricks to persuade the airflow to stay attached and therefore keep lifting and not just add drag. And it's just because we operate right at around about, to be technical for a moment, Reynolds numbers are about 800,000 to 900,000. And either side of those it's very difficult. You don't find full-size aircraft operating in those regions. They're much higher up, so that's fine. But it's a difficult problem, which sometimes will work with some things and sometimes won't.
Peter, thank you. Well, thank you, everybody. I think we'll call it a time there. We've gone 15 minutes over, but why not? It's been great questions, and I've thoroughly enjoyed myself. Just to remind everybody, next week we're back with an introduction to glider GPS triangular racing with Greg Lewis. So that should be quite interesting again, and that will be at the same time at 7:30. Yeah, get your registrations in. We'd like to get the numbers up again. We were just under 200 participants, and I know the YouTube channel's going very well. So again, and a virtual thanks to everybody on the panel here today, please, from everybody. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you very much indeed.
I'm just dropping links in the chat box for the next two webinars, Thursdays with Dave Phipps on Article 16 and next week's session with Greg. So
thank you.
Right, looking forward to it. They've all been excellent. No matter what the subject, I'm just going to hog the floor for a minute. I've joined every one of these webinars, and as you know, I'm an F3A pilot primarily, but I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to the presentations from the people who are enthusiasts and experts in their different disciplines, and it just shows what model flying, aero modeling is all about. They're great.
Well, thank you, Kevin. Yeah, I think we all concur with that, and it's the whole reason for setting this up is about sort of cross pollination of all our disciplines, and we all love model flying. We're all model flying freaks, and we're all crackpots, whatever. Who cares? It's just we love model flying, and that's what it's all about, really. And I've learned a lot this evening, and it's just really, really good. And I'm looking forward to next week as well. So yeah, thank you, and. Yeah, make sure you get your trilogy in as well. You need another one to do, I think, now. Might give you a month or two break, but
yeah, I could probably do with it. Maybe after we started flying again.
Yeah, could be a while.
Yeah.
Let's be positive. It'll be next month.
Yeah, it'd be great, wouldn't it?
Yeah, let's be positive.
Yeah.
So
most people left now.
With 100 still on.
Oh, yeah. Still listening. Probably still listening to the conversation. No, it's one of the things about the winter, isn't it? When you get a nice day in winter, you think, oh, I wish I could go flying today, because they're so few and far between. And up where where I live. Yesterday was an absolutely lovely day. We're out for a walk. You know, it's February now. You can just feel a little bit of warmth in the sun. And I thought, oh, I wish I could fly today.
Yeah.
Out of yesterday, and then I woke up this morning to 8 centimeters of snow, and it was nearly impossible to get out of the village.
Yeah, same here this morning.
Yeah, well, Andy's not too far from me, so yeah, it was quite exciting. Yeah, but it was a calm day yesterday. That was the thing. You don't get so many calm days.
Yeah. No,
Fine. The simulator's getting quite a bit of use at the moment, so that's useful for me because I'm learning a new schedule, which it's very good for, because it gives you that ability just to run through it time and time again. So the simulators are reasonably good, but obviously they don't give you the hands-on experience you really want to be having. But
Yeah.
we will get there.
They're good for learning coordination of the stick movements. What you don't get is the sort of 3D spatial awareness and the effect of wind so much, but you can certainly learn which way to push the sticks to do some of the odd shapes that we're asked to do.
I think we ought to, just before going any further, just say thank you to everybody who joined us on YouTube this evening.